Hi everyone, and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here with Tristan Boot.
Hello again.
Carlos Casanova.
Kirsty.
And we're speaking this afternoon with Robert Falkowitz
Hi,
from
Kirsty.
Concentric Circle Consulting.
That's right.
Yes, in Switzerland.
That's correct.
Switzerland. Wow.
Yes, so we're very pleased to have Robert all the way from Switzerland at the ITSMF conference this year.
Another short flight.
That's
Yeah.
right. So, Robert, you're in with a lot of customers, a lot of different companies and whatnot. Do you find that sometimes they're asking for certain things and you get there and you realize, maybe that's not really what they need and want? Do you find that?
Unfortunately, that's too often the case.
Right.
People will come to you and they'll ask for advice about, for example, how to optimize their processes or how to select a tool or how to implement a tool, because that's the visibility that they have. But when you start to analyze it and you look at what's really happening, you see that there's something more fundamental going on.
Yep.
And unless they address those more fundamental issues, the surface solutions that really only address the symptoms aren't really going to be long-term solutions.
Right.
Unfortunately, that happens too frequently.
Right.
Yeah, it does. I think we're probably working in the consultancy space. You do go in to solve what the customer thinks is the problem, but that's just a symptom of what the actual underlying problem is.
Yeah. And this is where I think some of the more recent work in adapting lean approaches to doing work, the use of Kanban for managing the flow of work, etc., become very, very important in all areas of knowledge work, which is what we do in IT, because it can potentially deliver very, very high improvements in terms of the reduction of the lead time, improvements in the efficiency with which you work, and that frees people up to do other things which have high value.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Until we get some of those big issues sorted out, why it takes a month to deliver something where there's really only a day's worth of work involved.
Yeah.
And that happens so frequently.
Right. So you did a workshop or a session on Kanban?
Yeah,
How'd that go?
the first morning we did a 3-hour session where I tried to introduce people to some of the fundamental issues that Kanban can address. The interest of a workshop to do this is if you just say to people, your flow efficiency is probably around 10%, which means on the average, if you have 1 day's worth of work to do, it will take you 10 days to deliver it.
Yeah.
People say, well, that's not possible. We can't be that bad. And then if you say, if you apply the practices of Kanban, you can make improvements where you bring that up and you improve it 3 times, 8 times, 10 times. And people will say, oh, well, that will never work in our organization, and they just won't believe you.
Right.
But when you do a workshop and you do simulations and you do games, they see for themselves.
Right.
Well,
And that's the interesting thing.
I think that's a well-known thing as well from putting people in a simulation point of view, and they're actually hands-on. As again, going back to what we spoke about earlier about the first session, different people have different styles of learning, different styles of input. So if you can actually get them in a room talking and doing it,
Yes.
it sticks.
Yeah. You have to get some of the key people involved in the process.
Right.
And the key thing is to kind of help them to turn their minds a little bit and look at things from the other side of the coin, look at things a little bit differently, and get them to think, maybe there are much better ways of doing this. And if you get a couple of key people involved in that, who can then communicate their enthusiasm within the organization, then you have a good start.
You've also got the opportunity to actually go into an organisation who actually knows what they want, from where we started. If they're actually having those conversations themselves, you're less likely to have that disconnect.
That's right.
Yeah, I know it's certainly an interesting. And it does happen all the time. That solving a symptom rather than solving a problem is a very common thing that we all end up doing.
Well, I think this is a very, very common phenomenon, and you see very frequently that you get involved in a project and you implement a set of processes and you do a lot of training, or you get a specific tool in place, and that costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time, and maybe you start to see some benefits to it. And then the person responsible who inspired all of that
Yeah.
work goes on to some other job
Yeah.
Right.
or goes to
Yes.
some other company. And now everybody relapses to the way things were before.
Right.
And all of that work you put
Yeah.
in doesn't really give you
It's
lasting
gone.
benefits.
Yeah.
So this is why I think it's very important to look at more fundamental issues and get people more involved and make true cultural change in the organization.
Don't rely on the heroes.
Yeah, that's my talk yesterday. There's a lot of heroes in organisations,
Right.
and when those heroes walk out the door, their knowledge walks out with them.
Well, and that's the leadership vacuum again. We have certain themes that keep popping
Yeah.
up in all the conversations. Is lack of leadership. Those leaders that put those things in place, those processes to talk about Kanban or whatever it was, they instill it. But as soon as they leave, the next person that comes in is not necessarily a leader. They're just a manager, and they allow it to just kind of relapse back on this thing.
Well, they're doing what they have learned to do
Yeah.
in their own training and what they have experienced previously. So you can understand it. But the other thing that's important is to remember that leaders and managers are not the same thing. Anybody can be a
Yeah.
leader.
Yes.
Yep.
Anybody working in any team, in any role, can be a leader.
Yep.
And if you have a situation where your organization and your culture allows you to recognize
Leaders.
the leadership of the person and capitalize on it,
Yep.
then you have a fighting chance.
Yeah.
I've spoken to so many organizations, done a lot of presentations on the difference between leaders and managers, and it's just crazy. And you have those conversations, and everyone's shaking their head, yes, but then it goes back to, well, you know what? But I have to do this by Tuesday, and it's just very regimented, and that's not what really needs. Back to your original point, it's not what really needs to get done. And those leaders in those lower levels know, but they're not allowed to because there's a manager above them that's kind of restricting them down to just check boxes.
Well, it's the whole command and control approach where the manager is there to tell people
Yeah.
what to do,
Right.
and they have a scope of authority that's defined,
Mm-hmm.
and outside of that, they dare not go.
Right.
And this actually comes back to the issue of being called in to help an organization to treat symptoms, because that's the scope of what that particular manager is allowed to do.
Make this go
Yes.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you see that the problem is actually in the scope of somebody very often at the level of the CIO.
Yeah.
But of course, then you're just a consultant coming in trying to get more money.
Well, you have the whole commercial issue. It's a delicate dance.
Yeah.
And you have to find the right balance between, customer's always right kind of philosophy and doing your best professional job according to your professional conscience.
Well, how many times have you gone in? It's happened to me a few times where I've been brought in to do an assessment on a certain area or whatnot, and within a day and a half, I find out the person that brought me in is the problem. So now you're sitting there and you have to, you're trying to do your best and help the organization as a whole, but yet the person that's going to receive the news is really sort of the crux of where the issue is.
Yeah. Well, if you can gather factual data
You just present
that
it.
can be presented
Yep.
in such a way that the person sees something that
Yeah.
they perhaps were not aware of, then you stand a fighting chance.
Yes.
If they're closed to the concept, then maybe it's a little bit more
A
difficult.
presentation never happens. It's just thank you for the report,
Yeah.
and you don't get called back usually.
Yes, no,
Well-
that's the one.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So you were involved yesterday too, Robert, in the Taking Service Forward panel that we had yesterday afternoon.
Yes.
We had a discussion with Christian Nissen about that
Right.
as well. And so how do you see, just very briefly, what can people do to help move that along, to help make that successful and make it something that we can actually get some benefit from?
Yeah. I think that in most organizations where you've done some type of diligent work in order to try to improve the way we manage services, people find that you hit a wall
Yeah.
at some point. You've been able to do something, you've been able to make certain types of improvements, and then the whole initiative seems to stall.
Yeah.
Right.
It seems to be very difficult to do anything better. And something's missing. Something's missing in the way in which we talk about services, the way in which we talk about service management. And we need to find out what those things are. And the only real way to find out is through the practical examples that are coming from people who are really doing the work. So the more people can come and testify and explain what those issues are, where the traditional frameworks are not really helping them to find answers, the more we know we're on the right track, and the more we know that we're trying to develop some type of solution that's really pragmatic and helping people. So we need people to come forward and testify to what their issues are. And then if people actually have time and they want to work on thinking through what can be done as ways of framing the issues and providing a vocabulary for describing those issues, well, that's great too. That's great too. We can never have enough people participating in the process.
Yeah.
So I think those are the two main areas where people can contribute.
Well, thank you, Robert.
You're very
It's been
welcome.
an absolute pleasure chatting to you this afternoon, and very nice to have you here in New Zealand. And I'm actually looking forward to spending a couple more days with you at the end of the conference.
Well, I am too very much,
Yeah.
and I'm really delighted to be here, and I thank you for the invitation to join you.
It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you, Robert.